All right, somebody analyze with great intellect the interest rate and supply and demand. What's the connection there? Jacob's willing to answer. We talked about this last class period if you're trying to figure out how far back to scroll. What is the interest rate in reality? The cost of money. All right, so it's just the price of money. So think about the supply and demand. Let me ask less vague questions. When we talk about supply and demand, if we're talking about money, what would the supply be? Here we're talking about people, it boils down to people borrowing money. If we're talking about the supply, who supplies the supply, or who's the supplier, who's the Amanda for this situation? Who's the supplier? We're talking about money. People saving money. Could be individual people, could be large companies. Insurance companies keep gigantic cash reserves so they can pay out claims. And anybody saving money. Those are the suppliers. And what does a high price of money do to the supply? Increases it. All right, if you were getting 20% interest at the bank, you would take all of your money, throw it in the bank, and then take the loan at 7%, and you're still clearing 13%. Just let it ride indefinitely. Say, I'll pay the bank back sometime. Just let that thing go. I mean, you're going to be incentivized to save money, right, because the price is so high. If it goes the other direction, if the price gets really low, then there's no incentive to save money. And on the demand side, the demand is people borrowing money. If the price of money is really high, a very high interest rate, then they're going to borrow less of it because it's more expensive. And if the price is very low of money, the interest rate is low, then people are going to borrow or tend to borrow more money. The demand is going to go up. And that is really part of what was part of the government policy to stimulate the economy, is to keep that interest rate very, very low, to encourage businesses to borrow money and expand their operations. It is funny to hear the same people that say we want to keep the interest rate low so businesses can borrow money also complain about the fact that there's not enough money in savings for these people to borrow. Right? I've actually heard them talk about all these greedy banks. They won't loan to people. They don't have any money to borrow because you put the interest rate so low that nobody wants to save anymore. So anyway, supply and demand functions there like anywhere else. We've been ingrained, even in America, to expect that thing to be regulated by the government. And it really shouldn't be any more than the price of cheeseburgers at McDonald's. It needs to be regulated by the government. That would be fun. Think of the cheeseburgers are. First of all, think about what that person would look like. A little bit healthy and plump because they have to frequently test their product. Well, plump, I guess, not healthy. But if you had some government agency picking what the fair price of cheeseburgers, I mean, it would create a gigantic mess. And that's what it's done with the interest rate. So one other facet of that before we move on. What if the government increases the supply of money? What does that do to the price of it? Just in general, if we increase the supply of something, what does it do to the price of it? If we have 4 people making gumballs instead of 1, the supply is increasing, what's going to happen to the price? It's going to go down, okay? And I don't expect that you really paid attention, but the government has had 3 or 4 ways of what they call quantitative easing, QE1, QE2, and it essentially is the government printing money. They fancy it up and they don't just print money and hand it out, but they're injecting large amounts of cash into the economy, which drives also down that interest rate because the supply is being increased artificially. So anyway, the point is interest rates it's just a price, and supply and demand will regulate that like everything else. All right, last time we also talked to the Federal Reserve System, a little bit about its organization and what it is. And we looked at 3 different ways it can meddle with the economy. Somebody tell me one of them. This you can just read it off. You don't have to explain it. Just tell me the name of it would be fine. Was everybody absent? Sarah with the H. Discount rate. Do you remember what that is? I know I said I wouldn't require you to, but.
Yes, but
Okay, it's the interest rate that this Federal Reserve charges banks. Right? If a bank gets in a position where they don't have enough cash on hand to give to people that are coming in for it, they can go to the Federal Reserve, borrow money, and then they're fine. It prevents the scene from It's a Wonderful Life where everybody's sorted into the savings and loan wanting money. They can go to the Federal Reserve and get more money and everybody's happy. Right? That rate that they're charged is a discount rate. And they can raise or lower that, and then the bank, they're not required to, but they're in this to make money. They're also evil corporations. They want to make money in this thing, so their interest rate will tend to float above whatever that discount rate is because they have to make more than that if they're going to clear a profit. Right? So the Federal Reserve can raise or lower this discount rate, and that will affect the interest rate, which then we talked about the supply and demand effect of all of that. So that interest rate for quite a while has been essentially zero, all right, which is incredible. All right, another one.
The open market policy.
Open market policy. Do you want to unfold that one?
So the government buys or sells bonds.
Okay.
If there's too much money if there's too much money, then they sell bonds.
Okay.
Is that backwards?
Well, you got to follow the cash. Where's the cash end up if they sell the bonds?
So let's see. They sell the bonds if there's too much money in circulation.
So that means people have.
People buy them if there's not enough. Right?
No, I think you said it right. If I'm the government and I think you guys have too much money, I'll print pieces of paper that say U.S. savings bond, put some gold seals on it so it looks official, and I'll sell them to you, and you'll give me your money. Right? I'm pulling cash out of the economy. If I think there's not enough money in circulation, I'll buy the pieces of paper back from you and give you piles of cash. So you said it right. So, good job. Are you still right if you thought you were wrong when it said?
No, I was thinking it right in my grave, but then it's been a crazy morning, so I thought maybe I said that.
Are you trying to distinguish that from other mornings, or is it
No,
just this morning? Okay. So, all right. And the third one is the reserve requirement. That's how much banks are required to keep on hand. You put $1,000 in, they have to keep right now 10% of that actually on hand. All right. Those are three main ways that we see the Federal Reserve tinkering and meddling with the economy. So, what I'd like to do first of all today is look at an example of the Great Recession that started in 2008 that supposedly we recovered from several times by now, but haven't quite gotten out of it. And kind of look at what's happening beforehand. I think with some of the things we've looked at, you can see here how much the government was meddling with the economy, and hopefully see some of the results. And then we'll see the inevitable results of this thing. So, all right, Great Recession of 2008. If you want to use a fancy term, this is a case study. Basically, just an example. That's all it is. So. All right, first point I have is that government meddling in the economy caused the Great Recession. Then I have their / housing market bubble. That housing market bubble kicked this whole thing off. And I'll list for you some ways the government meddled to create that. Government meddling in the economy caused the Great Recession or the housing market bubble that led to the Great Recession in 2008. I actually benefited from this thing. I bought a house in about 2001 and sold it in the summer of 2008, right before the housing market collapsed in the fall of 2008. So I sold it at the top. I felt kind of bad for the person I sold it to, but it was no fault of my own. It was the government that caused the problem. So, all right. I did not gouge the guy for one day. He actually got a pretty good deal on it, but I still made out. All right, government meddling in the economy caused the Great Recession. Here's some things the government was doing. First of all, it lowered interest rates. That discount rate, again, they can't just dictate what banks charge yet. Give them time and they will do that. Began to lower interest rates. That discount rate went from 6.5 to 1% in 2003. Not quite down to the 0% that it is today. That has been part of the way to get us out of this mess is to continue to lower that thing. 6.5 to 1. So we see that rate being dropped. Think about supply and demand and what's that going to do? The price of money is going down.
People aren't going to save and people are going to borrow.
People are going to be encouraged to borrow. There's not going to be any encouragement to save. If you're getting 1% on your savings account, why let the account build up to $20,000 and then go buy a house? Just go buy the house, borrow all the money. They're going to be encouraging people to buy houses, and that was part of the plan. They were trying to encourage that type of stuff. So that interest rate keeps getting pushed down and down and down to 1%. Hits that bottom, that point about 2003. If you want some dates on it, from 2001 to 2003, we see that interest rate getting pushed down. All right, the second thing that we have here is the government began to require banks to give mortgages to people who typically didn't qualify. Right? People who really didn't deserve to get a mortgage, the government began requiring banks to do that. We really had some stupid things going on at that point, but it was the government forcing it. The government actually threatened mortgage companies with racial discrimination if they didn't give out loans to people that didn't qualify. Well, I mean, according to the government, then only blacks would not be qualified to get mortgages, and somehow it was this rigged scheme by the whiteys to keep blacks from buying houses. I mean, that's, I'm not joking, the whitey part I was joking about, but I'm not joking that there was that threat there that if you don't loan out money to these lower income people that don't really deserve the loan, then we're going to accuse you of racial discrimination. So anyway, the point is the government began to require these companies to give mortgages out to people who typically couldn't qualify. Things like a no income verification loan. Imagine walking into a bank, I want to borrow $120,000 for a house, and the bank doesn't even ask if you have a job or how much you made last year. It's just, don't even ask. So David's thinking, man, I missed it. Let's go back a few years. Interest-only loans. Some of these things you can still get interest-only loans where you never actually pay on the principal, you just pay the interest off, which gives you the fill of a very small payment. You can borrow a whole lot more money if you never actually have to start paying off the principal. You just pay the interest every month. But you never actually pay the house off. No interest loans. No down payment loans. Right. Anyway, so some really crazy things. The government was forcing these mortgage companies to do to give out these things. If you want a general term for that, those are referred to as subprime loans that weren't prime. There was people really didn't qualify for them. All right, so we have the low interest rate. We have the government then pushing mortgage companies to give loans out to people that really didn't qualify. The third thing is that this then causes, really not surprisingly, an artificial increase in the demand for houses. The interest rates are very low. You can get a loan without really being qualified. All kinds of people start buying houses. All right, we get this massive boom in the housing market kicking in, 2003, 2004. Finally, the bubble pops in 2008, but from 3, 4, 5, 6, all through there, we see there's just more and more people wanting to buy houses, people getting loans that they, getting a $300,000 loan, like me getting a $300,000, I didn't do this, but a $300,000 loan, and all I pay back is the interest on the thing. I never really pay the loan off. But I could supposedly qualify for this gigantic loan because I just was paying the interest back. At some point, though, I have to pay my house off, but it creates problems down the future. We had all kinds of people getting mortgages that really didn't qualify, and it creates this increase in demand. So all of the builders are loving this because everybody's buying houses, and they're just building like crazy all over. All right, so we have an artificial increase in the demand for houses all through that time frame. And then the last point here in this government meddling is that as these, I have it phrased this way, as these happy new homeowners began to default on their loans, problems developed. As people stopped paying their mortgages off. The guy who had gotten money with no income verification and actually couldn't make the payment, he struggles along, makes some payments here, there. Eventually, he gets to the point where he just gives up. All right. So as these new homeowners began to default, there began to be some serious problems, and we see that come to a head late summer, early fall of 2008. If you're really into conspiracies, it was going to happen at some point, but there's some thought that it was pushed by some banks and things to cause things to collapse at that point, right before the election. There's a presidential election that fall, but as you know, a little bit of conspiracy stuff there. But it really did happen that people began to not pay back their mortgages, and then we get this cascading effect of problems as banks having major problems. Now we're protected by the Federal Reserve and the FDIC insurance. We don't have the panic that we had in the Great Depression. I'm not arguing that that is good. We're being insulated from the real world. We should have to deal with that. But it began to have some serious problems. All right, couple of points if you want to put them about some of the problems. All right, we began to have houses given back to the banks. You know, imagine Mary borrows $250,000, has this great house, a pool and a tennis court, and you know, a movie theater in the basement. You know, she's the work. She's got it all there, and she can't make the payments anymore. So she just walks away and says, all right, you can have the house back, and she goes on with her life. And does, you know, her credit is damaged and other things, but she just walks away from us. We begin to see that. That then eventually causes the price of houses to collapse. So we have this, you know, a significant drop in the price of houses because all of a sudden there's a whole lot more houses available. And then we have people like Tamar. She also borrowed $250,000, but she actually made payments on hers. So she started at $250,000, and now she's down to $240,000 that she still owes. But because of the housing market collapsing, her house is only worth $200,000. And at that point, people like Tamar said, well, why am I going to pay $240,000 for a house that's worth $200,000? And she also walks away and says, fine, bank, you can have it. I don't want it anymore. The phrase for that situation is they're underwater on their mortgage. If you ever heard that phrase, they owe more than their house is actually worth. And we can have lots of people in that situation. Not everybody walked away. If you're wondering about the morality of that, it would be wrong to do that, but it happened a lot. People just walked away from their mortgages, gave the houses up to the banks. And that causes the housing market to collapse in the fall of 2008.
Would refinancing help that?
Well, you still got to refinance the $240,000. I mean, the bank still wants that other $40,000. So eventually the government does step in, and this is a gross violation of the Constitution, as if all of this isn't, and actually forced mortgage companies to renegotiate with people that borrowed money from them, not so much to lower the principal, but to lower the interest rate. Right? No, when you get a mortgage, you sign a contract with that mortgage company. You know, that's something that the Constitution says the government can't meddle with. I forgot the phrase. Affecting the obligation of contracts is what I think the phrase in the Constitution. Right? But they actually went to mortgage companies and said you have to lower the interest rate and give them a new loan, which is, you know, they looked at the poor person who borrowed money at a high interest rate for a house they couldn't afford and said they were the victim. You know, they didn't look at those people and say, Mary, you were stupid. Why did you do that? That'd be the right answer. But they've required the mortgage companies to do that. So anyway, those are some side issues. All right, so we have that causes this housing market collapse in the fall of 2008. And in that fall, I got extremely angry with George W. Bush when he made this statement: the free market has failed. Talking about that collapse of the housing market. I mean, that was his assessment of it. The free market has failed. I still get angry when I think about that. I mean, how could you say that? He knew. I mean, he's not a dumb man. I don't think. Okay, does everyone see how that government meddling there caused that problem? I mean, the usual thing we hear about is, you know, the housing market bubble, the collapse, the free market not working right, or something like that. No, it's the government meddling that caused the problem. Right? Yes?
What was their reasoning behind it? I mean, let's just lower the interest rates 5.5%.
Well, it's hard to tell exactly what all the reason is for all of them, but some of them was they were trying to encourage people to own houses, which isn't necessarily bad, but that's not really the best way to do it. That's exactly it. They should have read Hazlitt's. So really, some of the roots of this go back to the mid-90s. I think it was 95. There was a law passed. I forget the name of it. That was encouraging people to buy houses. So.
If the government hadn't pressured the mortgage companies and the banks to hand out loans to people who qualified, do you think it would have had this much of an effect?
No.
No. It's just that they required
Yeah, I mean, you own a mortgage company and the government just kind of floats the idea that if you're not giving out enough loans to poor people, we're going to accuse you of racism. Then you start giving loans to the poor people. And I really didn't even bring up the fact that the government mortgage agencies, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the mortgage company really didn't keep these mortgages. They would loan out to some idiot like Mary. And then they would have this contract with Mary, and they would sell that to the government, and then you get all their money back. So they're just passing all this off to the government eventually, most of them. But all that means is the government then has to eat all of the debt when she doesn't pay the money back.
And by the government, you mean us.
Us, yes. Yep. Yep. Just next time, it gives Reagan's word great potency. The six or whatever the scariest words in the English language are. I'm from the government. I'm here to help. Right? That's when you run. Right? I don't need your help. Run like mad. So, okay, that was my first one. Government meddling caused this problem. The second point is the government's response aggravated the problem. The government's response. All right, two main things. First of all, we begin to have stimulus packages. There was a relatively small one passed in the fall of 2008 while Bush was still president. And then the next year, in 2009, another horribly named law, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009. If you remember the phrase, the stimulus package, that was it. And then there's another one later that I remember hearing referred to as the son of stimulus, like it was some horror movie, which is appropriate. So anyway, the stimulus package, a couple of them eventually passed. The particular one in 2009, when Obama's first year, was about $800 billion of spending. All right. Now again, it's not like the government had this big pot with $800 billion sitting in the corner of the Oval Office, and the president said, you know what, let's do something with that. This is money that they created. The government would essentially print some more money and go to a road builder and say, we want this bridge repaired, and give them that new money. All right, so they're pushing money into the economy, which further aggravates the problem. That continues to push the interest rate down because we're increasing the supply. And beyond all that, just the complete waste, the inflation that's created. Anyway, so we have that type of thing, and then we also have the interest rate continuing to be lowered. Right? It was following this that it gets pushed all the way down to 0%. You smash your thumb with the hammer, and so you start doing a couple more just because there's so much fun on it. It was more of the same. If you remember me, I don't know how well I get the emotion across, but when I talk about the Great Depression, I just get really aggravated because there's stupid government policy that created it, and then more stupid government policy that stretched the pain out for a decade or more. And it's really aggravating because anybody who has read Hazlitt's book, which wasn't written at that point, but that doesn't so excuse them, can look at this and say, this is really, really crazy. This is dumb. And the same thing is true here. If you've ever heard me say these politicians either are really, really stupid or they know what they're doing, it's things like that. I mean, this is not, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to see the problem here. So, all right, so anyway, that was the response. Massive ways of government spending, lower the interest rate. Liberals, some of them even argue that the reason why we didn't recover quickly enough was we didn't spend enough. The stimulus packages should have been bigger. All right, we should. Oh, all right. All right, well, one other little side note here, and this is just kind of a side note, but there were people who looked at all this stuff and said, this is going to create a problem. But they're really kind of stuck in a rut. But they still kind of play the game. If you're a builder and you're paying attention to the interest rate being lowered, and you see all these mortgages given out crazily, you might think this can't last forever, but you think it can last for this season, and I can build 50 houses this summer. So even if people were looking at this and said, this isn't going to work, they're thinking, well, I'm going to at least make money this summer. So there's even when you realize what's going on, the builders in this, it's not evil for them to want to make money. That's not wrong. But there's that profit motive that even if they realize it, they're still wanting to get in. Even the people buying houses knowing this doesn't feel right. But I get a house out of this thing. So anyway. All right. Great Recession, 2008. We're still suffering from it. So, questions on that? Several times. The Summer of Recovery, and not Al Gore. Wow, the other crazy. Wait, there's a whole bunch of crazy liberals. The Vice President, Joe Biden, told us the Summer of Recovery. I forget 2010 or 11. That was the Summer of Recovery. Yeah, you missed it. How could you miss it? Man, you must have been in high school or something. Okay. So anyway, we've talked enough about the interest rate, supply and demand, and Hazlitt's book and other things that you can see how that meddling caused problems. And it will continue to cause problems. It always does. All right, ready for the next topic? No?
Depends on what it is.
International trade? Just gets better and better. And we could skip to savings, or we can skip a couple days ahead to Adam Smith and the wealth of. Just skip. Just skip. Yes, well, we'll come back. I'm not saying avoid.
Take the
Online course. Next year, would you flunk this one? All right, international trade. Before we talk about this at all, sometimes people, when we get to international trade, it does get a little bit fuzzier, and we're talking about trade between countries, but really, in the end, it's just individual people trading things. There's really not some entity called China that is selling gimmicks to some entity called America. Right? There are companies in China who are making gimmicks, and some entity in America called Fairhaven Baptist Church buys them for their spring push. Right? So it is really nothing more complicated than trade between individual entities like that. But somehow when we're talking about nations and things like that, and you do have the complications of different currencies and exchanging currencies, there are some extra complications involved there, but it's just trade between people. All right? And that is useful to remember as we do this. Also, it's useful to not bring in to when we're just talking about trade and the economics of trade, the idea of national security. There is a grain of truth there that we do need to have some steel mills in America. And imagine if all of the steel is produced in China, and China wants to go to war with us. We're in a heap of hurt if we're buying all of our steel from China. Right? So there is some aspect to that we do need to have some of the capacity to make these things in America. We're not anywhere near not having the capacity for those things, so that would be like, driving down 94 and saying, "Now be careful, there's mountains out west, we don't want to hit them." That's true, there are mountains out west and it'd be bad to hit them, but they're a long ways off. Right? So that is a legitimate concern that we do want to have the capacity. In universal history, we're talking about Japan, right, and how they didn't have those resources, and they start expanding and attacking their neighbors to get them. We don't want to put ourselves in that position. So that is true, but let's not bring that in. And we're really not, I'm not just ignoring that, we're really not close to that situation in America. So, all right, first thing I'd like to really talk about is the fallacy of a balance of trade, or the fallacy of a trade deficit. And it is a fallacy. You still hear conservatives, or at least people that call themselves conservatives, talking about our trade deficit with different countries. Every now and then one will get up and say, "This is really stupid. What's this trade deficit thing?" All right? But it's a fallacy. It's a completely wrong idea. It is a dinosaur from the mercantilistic era, if I'm not mixing metaphors of different eons of history. It's an old sailing ship from the mercantilistic era or something. It really is all. It's something left from that we've not managed to kill off. Maybe Smith should have. We should edit his books and somehow work that balance of trade is a stupid idea in there someplace so it can get killed off as well. But it really is something that harkens back to that. So, all right, let me first of all teach you or talk about what is meant here by a balance of trade, and then we'll talk about how this is really, it's not anything worth keeping track of, so at least economically. All right, balance of trade. A country is said to have a positive balance of trade if it sells more to other countries than it buys from them. A positive balance of trade. So there's There's no Canadians in here, are there? Oh, I'll make sure tell them I use them as an example. So, we've got Canada and China. If Canada sells to China $1,000 worth of stuff, and China buys from them $800 worth of stuff, the net difference is $200. So Canada will have this $200 positive trade balance with China. And China will have a $200 negative trade balance with China. All right, so here, Canada is getting $1,000 of currency, whatever currency you want to pick, and China is getting $800 worth of currency. So if you look at the piles of money in either country, the pile in Canada is $200 taller than the pile in China. Okay, so if a country sells more, they're said to have a positive balance of trade. Then the opposite statement would be if a country sells less than they buy from another country, then they're said to have a negative balance of trade. Right, so China would have a negative 200 balance of trade. Okay, I have a list of reasons why this is really nothing worth tracking, but can anybody think of some reasons why this is really nothing worth tracking? The usual argument goes, well, at this rate, every year, Canada is going to be taking $200 from China, and eventually China is going to be broke.
Because the inflation in each country is different, so it won't stay at that 200.
Okay, you're saying inflation will change. That's true, but let's not talk about inflation.
You're getting $200 more goods.
Okay, we have, it is true that Canada's got 200 more pieces of paper that we call money, but China has $200 more of actual products. Okay, and in this analysis, that's never brought up. We really should put here, to get everything, we have this negative 200 and then a plus 1,000, and over here we have a plus 200 and a negative 800, and it really should all balance out. Hopefully, whoever in Canada is buying something for China gives them $1,000 and gets $1,000 worth of products back from them. I hope. And whoever's in China the other direction gives $800 to somebody in Canada and gets $800 worth of products back from them. If they aren't doing that, then they deserve to lose their money, and that's Adam Smith even talks about, that weeds out the inefficient producers. Okay, so the products are not even brought into this thing. Right? Other things. And really, think of the gimmicks we passed out this Sunday that we got from China. We gave them pieces of paper that our government says is worth something, says are worth something, and we have a little smiley face something. What would you rather have? At least you can play with the one. I guess you can make airplanes too. I don't know. To a great extent, that really is at the heart of it. If you track the money and the goods, and where's the trade deficit? I mean, it's not like Canada is just mailing $1,000 to China and China's mailing $800 back. They're also sending products back and forth. Okay. All right. On my list of things here, that's the second one. If we track the products, then there's no trade deficit. So another reason why this is nothing to worry about is if you think about your trade deficit with a store, and explain to me why you're not petrified about that. I have a gigantic trade deficit with Walmart. I spent $154 there on Saturday. They've never, ever bought one thing from me. It's massive, my trade deficit with China. Or with, wait, is that the same thing? My trade deficit with Walmart. Why do I not lay awake at night sweating over my trade deficit with Walmart? I got some stuff back. I got 150 rounds of 9mm ammo, and I bought a $100 gift card to give somebody. What else did I buy? Animal balloons for Sunday. That all goes together, I'm sure. I got products out of it. I didn't just go in there and hand the cashier my money and walk out. I walked out with something, okay? And In lots of cases, I'd rather have the ammo than the cash, right? So if you think about you and some store you do business with, there's a trade deficit there. And you don't lay around at night figuring out ways that you can make Walmart buy stuff from you. I don't anyway, maybe you do. Because the trade deficit is nothing to worry about. And if we take this to an international scale, all we have is somebody in Canada and somebody in China, and we have an exchange of money and goods. It really, in the end, is not any different than me buying something from Walmart, except that we have countries involved. And the trade deficit is just adding up all the people in Canada and all the people in China and coming up with some gross total. That's what we're talking about, the trade deficit. But it all boils down to that individual exchange. And I'm not petrified of Walmart. And there are some people that are, but I'm not on that group. So. Okay, so that's one facet of this thing, where it's not something to worry about. Another facet that we've kind of already hit upon, but I think is worth saying separately, is that this is also a voluntary exchange of goods in which both parties think they're getting a good deal. I hope. I mean, if you frequently buy things that are way overpriced, I've got some things to sell you. That Beretta, I'll buy it for $8,000 and sell it to you for $15,000. All right, but really, it's a voluntary exchange of goods. I went into Walmart. They have some brass cased 9mm ammo for $9.96, I think it is, that I like to target practice with because it's the cheapest I can find anywhere. But it's not always on the shelf. And when it's there, I buy it. And there was 4 boxes on the shelf, and I only bought 3. I did think of my fellow man. All right, and left one for them. But I didn't walk out of the store thinking, man, they ripped me off. I was kind of happy, rather than paying $14 a box at Cabela's or something, I'm getting it for $9.96. I was very happy. All right, and this international trade it's just a voluntary exchange of goods, and both parties should be happy. I mean, both are getting something they wanted more than the money that they had. We get our gimmicks. We're happy with them. We like them so much that we give them to bus kids to get rid of them. So it's a voluntary exchange of goods, right? And so that in that situation, neither side thinks they lost. They both are pleased with what they got, or at least on the surface. All right. A third thing to think about, and these next two get a little bit more, long-term. Megan will be right there with us, applying Hazlitt to the situation. In the long term, this international trade allows countries to focus on what they're good at. Right? We could try to grow coffee in Indiana, but the climate's not quite right. I mean, we could maybe build greenhouses. I don't know. I'm sure it could be done. But Colombia is much better at producing coffee and other things that get ground into powder. They're much better at that than we are. So we can buy the coffee from Colombia. Hopefully not buying the other stuff. We can buy the coffee from Colombia for less than we can do it ourselves. Right? So it allows us then to make things that we're better at. Can anybody think of anything that grows better in Indiana than coffee and marijuana or cocaine or something? Corn, all right? We just drive down the interstate sometime outside of, head west down 94 or something. There's corn everywhere. All right? It grows very good in Indiana. So in the long term, it allows us to focus on the things that we're much better at. What's that?
I was just saying annually, corn goes very well.
I know, but you guys live in a communist state. We don't want to talk about that. So.
It goes
It
very well.
goes very well.
Better
I don't know. You know what they say about love is blind. She's blinded by the love of her home state.
we have more corn than you, so.
What's that?
We have more corn than you.
I have absolutely no idea if that's true or not. So. All right. Since the boundary is just an artificially human-imposed boundary, probably there's not a whole lot of difference on either side of the boundary. But all right. So long term, it allows us to focus on things we're better at. And there is a reason why those little cheap plastic gimmicks are made in China and not in America. There's other reasons that complicate it, unions and other things, but that doesn't require a whole lot of intelligence on the person there operating the machinery. cutting out metal parts to fit into cars. There's a little more precision, a little more involved there. Oh, you were at engineering school. Did somebody work in a machine shop here once? I was thinking somebody did. But anyway, there's some of those more high-tech things tend to be done in America because of, not you guys, but a better educated workforce and other things like that. We're better at it as opposed to China. So anyway, it allows us to focus on the things we're better at. And then the last thing here, at least on my list, this is a little bit of a restatement of what we just said, but at least bring up a term. It allows for an increase in the division of labor. Maybe we should just put that with the last one, but that's okay. Allows for an increase in the division of labor. Even know what division of labor is? That's not when you're the oldest sibling at the house and mom says, all right, let's get the clothes done. And you point to the siblings and, say, and tell them to do it. That's not division of labor. The oldest sibling at my house tends to do that. My wife frequently says, Emily, you're not in charge. You're supposed to, anyway. Division of labor is where people focus on a particular sliver of the economy. Rather than you producing everything you need to survive, like me, I don't produce everything I need to survive. I give lectures and run an academy. I can't eat either one of those, at least I've never tried. Right? But people pay me money, and then I go buy the food I eat and other things. I have specialized and just do that one particular thing. Right? So it allows for the division of labor. We have people that, there's a guy I went to college with who went home and worked in a slaughterhouse. And his job all summer was to reach into the carcass and cut out a certain sliver of meat. As he was coming by on the hanging on the rack, he cut this piece of meat out, and it went by, and the next one cut it out. It was, I think he said 35 minutes or something around there from the time they killed the cow to the time the meat was frozen. It was that quick. And it's just a big assembly line. Everybody had a little piece they cut out. That's a pretty narrow division of labor right there. All right, so it allows for an increase of that. Division of labor, it allows you to be much more efficient at what you're doing. All right, we like to look back at the farmers in the Old West and say, yes, rugged independence. And they worked 20 hours a day and barely survived because they had to make everything they needed. All right, we were much better off, much more comfortable with some division of labor rather than you having to figure out how to make your own wagon wheels and make your own nails and grow your own food and all of that. You go to the store and you buy those things and you focus on something you're good at. So division of labor, it allows for an increase in that division of labor. Okay, so fallacy of a balance of trade. Everybody realize why it's stupid now? So, if nothing else, just think of Amanda. Just think of your relationship to a store. And really, all the reasons you're not scared of that deficit means we shouldn't be scared of a deficit internationally. I mean, that's nothing to worry about.
It's not even really a deficit.
No, we're giving them pieces of paper that our government says are worth something, and we have a real product. I don't know, if you have a laptop made in Korea, you give them the stack of money, and you have a real laptop. You can't write papers with your stack of money, but you can with a laptop. Is it still writing papers when you actually never write? No, that's... Okay. Fallacy of the balance of trade. Are we good there? All right, second thing is ways that countries protect themselves from foreign trade. This fear of a trade deficit causes countries to try to prevent other countries from selling stuff inside of their country. So ways they protect themselves from these things. They're always described as protecting themselves from foreign trade. Oh well. All right, I just have three here listed. I'm sure we could dig up some more, but to give you an idea. The one that I think is fairly obvious is a tariff, a tax on goods being brought into the country. This was part of the reaction to the Great Depression setting in, was implemented a tariff so that other countries made, I think it was about a 40% tariff, if I remember right, so it made it very expensive for other countries to ship things into America. They typically responded in kind, so our manufacturers also had to pay a 40% tax to take things into the other country. So tariffs, there are legitimate reasons for tariffs. For many years, it was the primary source of revenue for our federal government, which would be great to go back to that. We'd have to trim out about 90% of what the federal government does, so we can afford to do that, but it'd be great. So there's a legitimate reason for that. There needs to be some inspections as ships are coming in, especially today when in the world of Islamic terrorism and all that. We don't want to just say, come in, we're not checking anything, and they sell these barges full of dynamite and spread them. So there's some reasons to inspect and some security. There's some things that are expensive that need to happen. So there's a legitimate reason for that. But when we go to this idea of, well, let's just raise the tariff to prevent this trade, that really is a very dumb idea, right? Very dumb idea. Unions like it. Domestic manufacturers like it. If Amanda's producing gumballs and China's producing gumballs and she can convince the government to make China pay 40% of the value to bring theirs into the country, Amanda's loving it. All of her workers are loving it because they still have jobs. But all the rest of us that are addicted to gumballs, we're paying through the nose because we got to pay more all right, for the gumballs, because she can raise her prices by 39% and still undercut the gumballs from China. All right, so anyway, that's where if we apply Hazel's lesson and think about everybody, that makes absolutely no sense. So anyway, tariffs is one. Another possibility is an import quota, only allowing a certain number of product in. I don't know that we're doing this any today. We have in the past done things like this with cars from Japan and other things like that. Only a certain number of them in to limit their impact. And then one that I just heard brought up yesterday, anti-dumping laws. This is the idea where a foreign country will just flood some other country with their product. This recently the issue has come up with steel, where China will sell a whole bunch of steel to the United States below what we can produce, and the hope is that it will drive some American steel producers out of business, and then they can then have a corner on the market from China. Anti-dumping laws. It was under Bush, I remember a wave of that type of stuff coming in to save the steel mills here. And it's just yesterday, something about Obama and preventing China from dumping steel on us. I just read the headline of this idea and be revived. So countries do things like that. If you think back to mercantilism, if you can remember that from American history, there were all kinds of regulations that they implemented to try to create this positive balance of trade. Everything from any merchant ship going to the colonies had to go through England first and then over to the colonies to funnel the money through there. They had all kinds of things. We haven't quite got that sophisticated with it yet, but the thought behind all these is the same.
Does this include private trade internationally, as far as does the government monitor all trade, whether it's the government actually trading or the public?
Oh, it involves all of it, but if you're wanting to buy a computer from China, if you want to do that or not, if you're buying something from China, when that product comes into the country, if there's a tariff on it, the tariff gets collected at that point, and you get it. So you really are not, it's not the government following all of your keystrokes on your computers if you're buying it from China.
But
it would apply to you.
Flooding, so could a private entity almost flood
other parts of the country?
Whatever.
Yeah. Some people accuse Walmart of doing this type of thing. They'll come in and sell all these products below what the local mom and pop stores can do and drive them out of business. If you just listen to what they're saying, they come in and they're selling the same products for less than anyone else can do it, and that's described as bad. But really, no, at least for this, it's really just talking about country to country. At least at this point, we still have, if you want to start a company, treating lawns for weeds, you can go to some city and drop your prices super low and try to drive the competition out. That's just business. And really internationally, it is just business. I mean, if they want to give us steel for less than they can produce it for, I'll take it. All right, so there's some ways countries protect themselves from foreign trade. All right, let's try to finish up international trade today and talk about exchange rates. Now, this does hurt your brain to think about a little bit. Exchange rate. This is my simple definition of an exchange rate. It's the value of one nation's currency compared to another's. the Czech Republic. I don't know if they still do. It was about 10 years ago I was there, and they used crowns. And I have a sword in my office that I bought in Prague. And I can't remember, it's 2,800 crowns to the dollar or something. I remember standing there looking at the price of this sword in, thousands of crowns, trying to do the math in my head to figure out how many dollars it was. So I had some way to gauge it. It was, I don't remember what it was now. It wasn't that expensive. It took a long time to get it to the States, if you can imagine, trying to figure out how to, just stick it in your pocket. It took a long time. I eventually had to have a guy in the military bring it over with him when he came back from the States from his tour. What was I saying? Oh, all the prices were in crowns, and I had to, in my mind, convert to U.S. dollars. We went and exchanged money when we first got there, and we got this gigantic pile of crowns, and we felt like we were fat cats until we saw that, it's 10,000 crowns for a hamburger or something. Okay, not quite so much money. But that's all the exchange rate is, what one currency is worth in terms of another. All right, the kwacha, do you have any idea what the kwacha is now? When I was there, I think it was about 3,500 to the dollar.
They change stuff around.
They reevaluate all the time, but it's kind of fun having these, 50,000 kwacha bills. That's worth $1.50. Sounds like you got a lot of money. Think about the tricks you can play with your younger siblings. Look at this $50,000 bill. 50,000 kwacha bill, not the dollar bill. All right, so that's all we're talking about. What one country's currency is in relation to another country's currency. And the end of this is that there is a natural exchange rate. If you think of that as a price, there's a natural point at which that's going to go to. Right? We don't have today a whole lot of governments meddling with this price. It really is left up to the market to let this thing fluctuate for the most part. But there's a natural exchange rate that the market will determine. If everybody wants to buy stuff from Canada, then the Canadian manufacturers, they're going to want to get paid in Canadian dollars. So we, at some point, have to convert our currency to Canadian dollars to buy that thing. If you do it online, it's all done through the banks. You don't actually have to go get Canadian currency and throw that in your bank. It's all done through the banking system. But you pay with your U.S. dollars. They collect Canadian currency at the other end. All right. So if a whole bunch of people wanted to buy products from a certain country, they're all going to have to get a hold of that country's currency at some point to buy that product. And that's going to cause the price of that currency to go up. Right? We also can factor in here some countries' currency is much more stable. Right? If you want to, you could buy Zimbabwean dollars and try to store your wealth there. Or you could buy the U.S. currency, which is a little more stable. Sometimes people will want a certain country's currency just because it's more stable, and the government's not at the point of defaulting and going into bankruptcy and the money becoming worthless pieces of paper. So sometimes people will want a certain country's currency for that reason, not really wanting to buy something, but it's more stable than the country they're in. So there's a natural demand for this stuff, and that will affect the exchange rate. The more people want to buy something, the higher the exchange rate is going to be, the greater the demand for that. All right, so there's a natural place where this will float to if left to itself. If the government tries to meddle with it, it will create problems, just like the government meddling with the interest rate creates problems, or rental rates, or whatever you want to talk about. The government meddling with this will create problems. If they undervalue the currency or overvalue it, it'll create major problems. Okay, so the exchange rate. It does really get to be fun if you've ever traveled internationally, trading currencies, and it's a lot of fun. Anybody ever traveled and had to deal with another currency? You've done it a lot. You guys really like it when the exchange rate shifts against you and you get a pay cut. We always hear missionaries complain about when the exchange rate goes against them, but I've never yet heard them call back and say, yeah, the exchange rate really went in our favor. We're going to send some money back because we have too much now. That's never happened. All we ever hear is about it going down. So,
If the governments were to decrease the amount of cash in our economy
yes,
and get closer to the gold standard, would that in
Yes.
effect decrease our national debt to other countries? Because our currency is not worth more?
no. Now again, yeah, no, it wouldn't. The numbers, on whatever the agreement was where the money was loaned will stay the same. It actually will make it feel higher because each of those dollars is worth more. What's that?
Just do what Germany did,
Just print it. Just print it. That would make it. Well, it's like. What? Yeah. To Jefferson, I think it was, that described a tariff as curing corns by cutting off the toes. It would take care of the problem, but the solution hurts a little more. So, all right, international trade. Questions there? If you get nothing else out of this, worrying about a trade deficit is stupid. That pretty much has it. I might ask for a little bit more explanation at some point in the future, but that's the heart of it right there. And then define stupid or something, extremely unintelligent. So. All right, see you